Hello, welcome friends. Good to see you. How are you doing? I hope you have had a good day already. I've had a pretty eventful day actually. I was I had managed to complete a huge piece of work yesterday, and I took the liberty of going on a nice walk in the countryside. Where I live, Berwick upon Tweed is right on the coast and right on the border between Scotland and England. And so I decided to go down to the cliffs today between the two countries, or just around the border. I'll see if I can show you some pictures because it's just such a it was a nice sunny day, windy as always, but it was buzzing with life. There was some. I think spring is truly in now. Let's see. Hopefully, you could see that. Yes, so these are the cliffs towards Scotland. You can see, actually, I think the furthest cliff there in the background, up here, is actually Scotland, but where it's being taken from is England. Let's zoom in a bit more. This is the rock where I always go. It is the Needle's Eye. You can't see it from this angle, but beneath it is a kind of an arch, which you could probably go through, probably wide enough for a human being to go through. And around this bay, let's see if there's another photo here. Off in this direction is the island of Lindisfarne, the holy island where the monks, led by St. Aidan and St. Cuthbert, practiced Christianity and celebrated worship of God until they were attacked by the Vikings. But in this bay, it is a nesting site for many seabirds. And I was very fortunate to see, I think today is the first day that many of them are arriving back from where they've migrated from over the winter. So we had razorbills dropping into the water in little clusters, others moving further up the coast, which was very exciting. We should be seeing guillemots soon. These chaps on the rock here, can't see them too well, I'm afraid, but they are cormorants. They live here all year round. And today, I actually, for the first time, got to see the mating ritual of some of these cormorants. These two on the end were the ones who were engaged in this. You had the male here and the female. And it was quite interesting. The male, for a number of minutes beforehand, was grooming himself very vigorously. I'd never seen a cormorant try to get its clean so thoroughly. It was putting its neck all over its shoulders and back. It was really going to town. And this was all while the female cormorant was just watching. She was just allowing him to do his business, let him get clean. Then he started to stroke his beak up and down her long neck. And she was just standing there allowing him to do this. He then closed his mouth over the female cormorants. She then presented, and the act was consummated. No kind of, sometimes you see a sort of fight almost. Nothing like that. It was very tender. But that was amazing to see. I've never seen anything quite like that in the wild. So yeah, it was a really nice day. Very, very, very moving to see spring coming in finally, and all the bird life returning to this little corner of the world. And that kind of leads us, I suppose, to what our topic is today. This was chosen by the members of this channel, those who financially support me every month. And I must say thank you once again, because it really does make it possible for me to run this channel and make these videos. And out of a vote, they decided that they wanted to hear about Eros, the power of Eros, or romantic love, let's say. In particular, in myths and legends, fantasy, and perhaps science fiction. What is the force of love? And this might seem a rather trite question at first, because it's a theme that is so common in a lot of stories, right? We've all heard of the story of the prince who, to win a woman's favor, will fight a dragon, do some daring deed, and then they will be united together. But this gets at something I think that's quite interesting. What is it about love which makes it plausible that it could drive somebody to do a great deed? What is it that allows it to make it bring out the heroic? At the same time, though, love is also a destructive force. It can be a destructive force. It can overturn relationships of kin, of government. It can undo kingdoms. It can even defy gods. And so this force is quite unique. And yet, for many of us, it is probably up there with one of the, how would you put it? If you were to tell a story of like fundamental stories of humanity or really central ones to how we see the world, what are those great stories? We probably think somewhere along the line of a romance, a couple who are facing off against the odds. This is not the only cause of great deeds. I want to make that clear at the beginning. There are other motivations that drive human beings to greatness. If we look at the character of Beowulf, for example, nobody could say he was motivated by romantic love. There's no indication of that within the text. Rather, fighting Grendel, the monster who has damaged Heorot, he's seeking glory, fame, and possibly riches, right? He's going to get rewarded afterwards. Then later, when he fights the dragon, it's to defend his people. He is their king, he has a responsibility to do so. Others, maybe it's the pursuit of knowledge or treasure. Think of somebody like Indiana Jones, who travels across the world, taking on the Nazis and other forces to preserve and recapture those great artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. Maybe another source is revenge or hatred. Captain Ahab will take on the monstrous Moby Dick with others or by himself because he has a desire to see it destroyed for what it's done to him. He just absolutely would. He would go to the ends of the earth out of sheer malice against this beast. And then others, it's just because it's there. Think of the great explorers like Scott of the Antarctic or Edmund Hillary, who climbed Mount Everest. They didn't do it out of romantic love. They did it because of what Spengler would call the Faustian drive to conquer, to explore, to map all of space and time. I think one of them said, I think Hillary said, or someone like him, that he climbed the mountain because it was there to be climbed. This deep European drive. So these are other sources of great deeds, and perhaps there are others that you can think of as well. But Eros or romantic love, which often involves but is not always sexual, is one of these sources. Let me add my presentation to the stream. That might be a good starting point. And so why in particular look at Eros? Well, there's a couple of reasons that I was motivated beyond. I was motivated to put it to my members as an option. One was a few weeks ago, I had a stream where I had on Shia Tori, Connor McHugh, and Ragplays, and we were discussing the prequels. And one of the themes that kept coming out was the Anakin and Padme's relationship, their romance, and how it really drove the plot of Revenge of the Sith. And it ended up that Anakin, out of love for Padme, would see the Republic crash and burn, would kill all of his friends and colleagues in the Jedi Order, would essentially allow the whole universe to collapse into chaos and evil so that he can save his beloved. That's quite a powerful idea. And so I wanted to see, is this, unique to Star Wars, or is this an older theme, and can we explore it in other ways and in richer texts? A second kind of push in this direction is that hmm, well, there's a lot of discussion within the distant right about male and female relationships and the role of sexuality within these relationships, right? And there's a strong kind of disagreement about should these relationships be aiming towards and sexuality be confined within marriage, perhaps a Christian or traditional perspective that as it's kind of presented by traditionalists, or should we have a looser understanding, maybe such as advocated by the pickup artists, the red pill community, where young men should go and seek to, be sexual conquerors before they settle down, or perhaps just being more open and understanding of, the world we live in today, and that this is just a normal part of life. But these conversations never, as far as I'm aware, engage with love as it's presented within mythology and legends. And this seems a huge oversight for the distant right if given that it urges many people to recover these stories, to return to them and see the values within them. I know that there's appeal to Evola and his interpretation of mythology, but beyond that, there's very little discussion of actual myths and legends. It's rather his interpretation of them. Um, and then, as a final kind of motivation, this was motivated by the previous stream, so on Ruskin and Morris, that I did with Pharaoh, Lady of Shalott, and Plantagenet. And these figures were, in this period, the Romantics, the Pre Raphaelites, and so on. They were a Victorian counterculture. They saw their contemporary world as rotten, as enslaving Victorian Britons in the service of line go up thinking, of growing people's wealth at the expense of their humanity. And so, one of the ways that they sought to articulate a richer vision of life was a return to the medieval. And within that was an emphasis upon romantic love. So, all these factors kind of came together to make me want to do a stream on this. And thankfully, my members said, yes, let's do this. So, um, I'm going to kind of go through a number of themes here with romantic love, bringing them all together at the end and how it might be useful for us to think about its role within contemporary society and politics. Before we go on, let me say hello to folks who have been talking in chat. Hello, Shai Tori, Vingle, Valtra, Lukey World, Kate, Tingfang Warble, Connor McHugh, Biaki, Julius Flavius, Rito, Hannah. It's great to see you all here. And to those who haven't commented, you are also very welcome. Please remember to like and comment below the video or in the chat what you think about this topic, how you respond to what I say. I'll have a look at it at the end of the stream. So let's go to our first slide. So I think an important point here is to first understand what kind of thing Eros or romantic love was in the pre-modern world, because it's tempting to apply our own understanding of emotions to these older stories and read back into them the kind of experience they're talking about or the kind of thing they're talking about. Today, we often think of an emotion as a response, a reaction to something which is internal. Maybe it manifests in bodily behavior, but it has no further impact upon the world. And it is not and it is a closed off thing. It's just something that you feel, right? But in the in the ancient and early modern view, they didn't use the word emotion to describe feelings. They used the words passion and affection. Now, a passion for our sake, a passion was first and foremost caused by an external agent. This external agent, let's just say you see an object, you see a beautiful flower. In the ancient view, this flower acts upon your faculties. It triggers something within you. And that triggering is causes a what you might call an initial jolt or instinctual impression of that object. Is it good or bad for me? Is it something I will enjoy or hate? And that reaction is the first motion of a passion. So you can see in that process, this flower in an Aristotelian metaphysic has acted upon you. It's caused a process to take place within you, and what you're in that process, hence passion. And in a way, that triggering isn't just an external object acting upon you. They would think that it's in some sense gone into you or has has penetrated into your very being by doing so. And your reaction to it is almost an effective apprehension and knowledge of the kind of thing that is, at least if it's accurate, your judgment. With that in mind, then we can start to understand some of the ideas around Eros in the ancient world. It was often portrayed in mythology in the figure of Cupid, who in the Greek equivalent is actually called Eros. He would shoot arrows or bolts with his bow and arrow, this god of love, and those who it struck would, if it struck them in the eyes, it would travel down into the heart, wounding and piercing the heart, thereby enveloping them in a passionate, frenzied love for the person that they see. So, for example, Eros shot the god Dionysius, and he was overcome with a jealous love and lust for Aurora, this beautiful woman. It could also work the other way, though. Sometimes he shot bolts of hatred. And so, if he had shot, let's say Dionysius had been shot by a bolt of love, if he wanted to torment him, he would shoot the beautiful woman with a bolt of hatred. So she would shun Dionysius, thus causing estrangement and unrequited love. So just remember, if we're using the theory of the passions, again, it's an external agent that's bringing this passion into being within you, this almost irrational response. Another kind of example of this is the love potion, which plays an important role in the story of Tristan and Isolde, which you can see depicted on the screen here. This is a tale which begins with King Mark of Cornwall defeating an Irish king. And as part of the peace settlement, he is to be married to the Irish king's daughter, Isolde or Isolt. And she is very fair and beautiful. He sends his nephew Tristan to go and pick up his bride to be. And as they are traveling back, they drink a love potion. This potion again works this passion within them, this instinctual response, and they are unable to resist. They are overwhelmed by love for each other, and thus they begin an affair. This is an example of the courtly love literature that we will touch on later in the stream. But the point is that this isn't something which arose within the self. This is something which has been caused by an external thing, whether a bolt or a potion, and it's almost forced upon you. You can't do anything about it. The totalizing effect of this is captured in the idea that Eros was often called the madness of the gods. It disturbs all of your ways of thinking, feeling, and doing, and forces you into It forces you into a new way of living, which is at odds with how you were before and what might be considered normal. To get at this idea, we can look at the text De Amore, or The Love, by Andreas Capellanus, who was a 12th century writer, and he was giving a manual to courtly love. And within that, he gave 31 rules to guide the knight in his attempts at courtly love. And I think a few of them are quite helpful in illustrating this idea. So, number 2, he who is not jealous cannot love. The person who loves, it's not just a quaint and calm thing that's being described here. It is almost overbearing, that it cannot abide anything other than being united with the one that is loved, with the beloved. This follows on to number 3. No one can be bound by a double love. This madness is directed at one individual. If you claim to love two people at once, that is not possible. It is such an overpowering affection and passion that it has a single recipient. Number 12 of Capellanus's list. A true lover does not desire to embrace and love anyone except his beloved. So very much articulating the same point again, that this desire is so strong that any other suitor is instantly rejected, as it were. You only want to be with one person, your beloved. 24, 25, and 26, I'll read them together. Every act of a lover ends in the thought of his beloved. A true lover considers nothing good except what he thinks will please his beloved. Love can deny nothing to love. In these 3, we get to the heart of the matter. When somebody is in love, has been shot by one of Cupid's arrows, all that they think, feel, and do is directed towards their love of their beloved. They will do anything for them. They will do anything to be united with them. And all of their actions are directed by this goal. So it's all possessing. It's almost a force which is acting through you and driving everything you are. And nothing can get in the way because it is the ultimate end or highest end. So you could see this then as if you were to compare it to the Christian idea, or that, well, Jewish and Christian idea, that God is to be loved with all of one's mind, all of one's heart, all of one's will, all of one's strength, so all of your being. Well, for our man here, Andreas Capellanus, Eros has that effect on you, but for your beloved. So it's all channeled in on the person you love. And so that's why it's a kind of madness, because everything that you are and do is bent in on serving, on cherishing, and on embracing your lover. And you will overcome any obstacle to achieve that end. That is why it drives people to greatness, because there is nothing higher that they will pursue, and there is nothing that they will let get in the way of this end. We can see that. Oh, I've skipped a painting here. This is quite an important set of paintings. So on the left, we have here Caravaggio's Love Conquers All. And on the right, we have a painting by a Dutchman a few decades later, which is clearly emulating Caravaggio's more striking one, I think. So you have here the figure of Eros, or Cupid. He's the cherub with the arrows. I think the one on the left is certainly more mischievous looking. And he's trampling over or standing on a number of cultural artifacts. You have in the background here music. I think that's a violin. You have writing. You have armor, so soldiery. You have flowers, animals, the globe. I think there's also a crown, and it's certainly in the Caravaggio on the right. There's a crown just there. You also have a white cloth, could be priestly garments. Essentially, the painting is essentially saying that Eros comes above all of these things, or it tramples on all of these things. We hold them in high regard, our culture, our government, our religion. But fundamentally, romantic love can break all of these apart and is a more powerful force than all of them in its mischievous way. That's the natural consequence which of this idea that love can drive our whole being when we're possessed by it, when we're overtaken by its madness. Now, needless to say, I don't think that every kind of relationship, every kind of loving relationship, romantic relationship has this intensity, but it is presented in a number of stories. Not least the first one that I wanted to come to. Let's see. The story of Beren and Luthien, which is a key episode within Tolkien's Silmarillion. Here we see a perfect example of a man being overcome. I think the text says enchanted by the beauty of his beloved. The first time he sees Luthien dancing in the forest, who is said to be the fairest of all elves, of all creatures in Middle-earth, he is just in rapture. He can't take his eyes away, and he falls in love with her. When she disappears, when she leaves the scene, he is almost reduced to an animal. He's kind of paralyzed. He can't speak. But when she returns, he is brought back. He is filled with life again. Finally, they embrace, and she falls for him too. But her father, King Thingol of the elves of Doriath, will not allow his daughter to be married off to some man, to some mortal. No, no. Even though Beren is of high status, he charges Beren with a bride price, you might say. If you want to marry my daughter, you must reclaim a Silmaril. Well, a Silmaril, this is a beautiful gem which contains within it the light of the trees of the sun and moon, which were destroyed by Morgoth. And Morgoth took those Silmarils, those jewels, and bound them upon an iron crown which he wears on his head. And so to reclaim this jewel is going to be an almighty task, because one must infiltrate the Dark Lord's fortress, get past all of his all of his minions, and then take the Silmaril from this powerful ancient being. Well, for Beren, he says, despite the difficulty of this quest, this, and I think Julius Flavius has just said it, small treasures for your daughter's hand. This is nothing. How cheap does the Elven King give up his daughter for a mere jewel when she is so beautiful and lovely? So he sets off on his quest. And Luthien, in love with Beren, sets off too, behind him in part. And together, overcoming various obstacles, they reach Morgoth's throne room. They are able to reclaim the Silmaril. And even though the gem itself is taken by the dog or wolf Karkaroth, eventually, as the story proceeds, it is finally reclaimed. But that's not the end of the brilliance of their love. Beren is slain in his fight with Karkaroth. He's able to reclaim the gem from this wolf by slaying it, but he is killed in the process. Luthien, overcome with grief, it passes away herself into the halls of Mandos, Mandos being the guardian of the dead in Tolkien's Legendarium. And she sings a song so beautiful, more beautiful than had ever been heard in the world, that it moves Mandos for the first time ever to concede. And the Valar are so overcome by their love that he allows Beren to come back to life on the condition that, well, Luthien has a choice to die with him essentially as a mortal, and so she takes that up. She would rather give up her immortality to live forever and be with Beren because she loves him so much. And so you can see in this story that Tolkien's made here that that the love that they have for each other enables them to, well, it gives them courage to face almost impossible tasks like taking on the Dark Lord, overcoming death itself, because all they want is to be united together. That is the highest end for themselves. It gives them almost supernatural strength, and it empowers them to do the impossible. That is perhaps the good version of what this force can do. But it has a very destructive side as well. And I think we can see this in a number of different ways. The first is in terms of its social bonds. Because love becomes an end in itself, because it is all consuming, those loyalties we ought to have, our obligations and responsibilities, can be put to the side and broken by the force of Eros. And in so doing, it can bring down a whole social institution, a people. I could have used, for example, the story of Romeo and Juliet and how both parties, Romeo and Juliet, were essentially betraying their loyalty to their kin, who were warring families, to be with each other. Juliet herself was breaking her father's and mother's pledge that she would be married to Paris. So she was breaking her betrothal as well. But I think a more interesting example comes from the medieval romances. We've already mentioned Tristan and Isolde, but the other great example is Lancelot and Guinevere. This painting isn't actually Lancelot and Guinevere, I discovered, but it often pops up as such. Lancelot is, of course, one of the famous knights of the Round Table of King Arthur, and he was perhaps one of Arthur's greatest knights. However, almost from the beginning, when he first saw Guinevere, he and Guinevere fell in love, or there was a spark of love at least, and he pledged himself to serve the Lady Guinevere. Now, this was quite a common feature of the courtly love practices of the Middle Ages. The courtly love genre emerged and etiquette emerged from troubadours and poets who would travel from various courts seeking the favor of the lady of the court. They would do this in part because when the lord or king was off fighting, it would be the lady who would take charge of the court and be the highest authority, and so she could offer uh, patronage and an ability to rise up the social ranks. This was also the case for knights as well. They might pledge themselves beyond their feudal obligations to the service of a lady, that they would defend her honor and fight in her name. So their deeds would be done for her sake. To this effect, they may wear the colors of the lady. Blue and black, I think, indicating faithfulness. Green, unfaithfulness. And often this could turn into, at least in the stories, it's debated how far it went in history. But in the stories, this often resulted in an affair, a secret affair between the lady and her vassal, the lady and her lover. This affair was in secret, it was a secret tryst, and although it was filled with eros and charged passion, again, it's debated to what extent sexuality was consummated. Was it better to desire strongly from afar or to consummate it? This was one of the debates in courtly literature. The thing that we find, and we find these ideas in what's his face, Andreas Capellanus's 31 Rules. For example, marriage is no real excuse for not loving. So, even though the lady is clearly married, she should engage in love with a courtly lover if that's appropriate. And this, I think, gets to a really interesting point about arranged marriages, because, of course, during this period in the medieval era, most marriages were done for social and political reasons. They were not affairs of the heart primarily, but rather were motivated by gaining power. So, for example, one lord might marry the daughter of another lord so that they would have a pact of mutual defense, building friendship and bonds together. This was clearly the case when Alfred married off his daughter, I think her name was Ethelred, something like that, to the governor of Mercia, who was under his command at that point. It was a way of tying together different families. If you've played Crusader Kings 2, you will know this particularly well, that you're often trying to get your the women in your family married off to powerful connections who can then help you in battle and combat. What this means, though, then, is that if love is an important part of human life, there's no guarantee it's actually a part of an arranged marriage. And several scholars have suggested, well, given this context, this allowed for or cultivated a culture in which secret affairs with noble knights who pledge their loyalty and love to a lady is a natural consequence. It's an outlet. Because the arranged marriage doesn't have that, it goes into these secret affairs. And so I've seen a number of people suggest that our society would be better if we followed arranged marriages, where the community had more of a say in who we marry. But often it's not reckoned with the fact that this may in turn lead to the sorts of affairs we see in courtly love. Certainly, I know of towns close by, very small towns, where people get married quite young, usually out of convenience, and they often have multiple affairs in their village because the marriage itself was not born of love. So I think that's an interesting response or possible corrective to the idea that arranged marriages are the solution to the current situation. Let me see, what were some of the others? So, number 13. When made public, love rarely endures. So, Capellanus is very much telling us that the intensity of this romance between the lady and her lover comes from its secretiveness. This allows it to increase rather than decrease. When it's known that these two are in love, it undermines what they have together. You kind of see that idea with Anakin and Padme in Star Wars as well. It's so charged because they have to keep it a secret. Number 22. Jealousy and therefore love are increased when one suspects his beloved. Now, again, I think this is interesting given what we've just been saying about courtly love. If the husband, the Lord, believes that the lady is having an affair with one of her followers, the idea here is that might actually increase his love for the lady. He may have been neglecting her or not spending time with her, going off fighting wars and so on. And so he will want to reclaim her for himself. It will arouse jealousy within him. So in a weird way, although originally the arranged marriage was not of love, her having an affair may in turn bring it back round to the arranged marriage being filled with love. Anyway, those are some aspects of courtly love which I think are important for background ideas for then understanding the story of Lancelot and Guinevere. Lancelot served and did many deeds for his lady. He would battle great forces, and he would do one-on-one combat to defend her honor. And throughout, he was victorious, pledging them to her. But at one stage, she was kidnapped by one of Arthur's greatest villains, and it was Lancelot who rescued Guinevere. He broke into her prison. And in Thomas Mallory's version, The Death of Arthur, when he broke in, they made love together. So there was something about rescuing her, being the one to save her, which broke forth in this passionate consummation. From that time on, they were truly lovers with one another. And various knights started to suspect that something was taking place. And they challenged Guinevere's honor. Lancelot took them on one-on-one combat, trial by combat, and was victorious multiple times, protecting Guinevere's faithfulness. But eventually, Arthur finds out. And totally distraught and feeling betrayed, he condemns Guinevere to be burnt to death for her crimes, for her unfaithfulness. Lancelot and his family and followers, discovering this information, save Guinevere. They break into the execution, as you can see portrayed here, and they rescue her and take her away. And they slay many of Arthur's knights in the process, including the brothers and relatives of Gawain. He is so enraged by this, incensed by this slaughter, especially of unarmed men, that Gawain persuades Arthur to go on the warpath, to go against Lancelot. First, they besiege his castle in Britain, and then they pursue him into France. But this is the undoing of Arthur's kingdom. For while he is away in France, his nephew Mordred proclaims that Arthur is dead and takes the throne for himself. He also attempts to rape Guinevere. Thus, there is great destruction within the nation. Arthur is forced to return, and though he defeats Mordred in battle, he himself is fatally wounded and taken off to Avalon. Lancelot returns, but it is too late. Though both Guinevere and Lancelot were forgiven in some versions by Arthur before the end, certainly Guinevere is filled with remorse. In Mallory's presentation of the story, she believes that their affair, that her adultery, was the cause of the destruction of Camelot, of Arthur's reign, leading to the deaths of many noble knights and of the king himself, and thus of the political order, allowing for the end of well, we could say of Roman Britain in a way, or at least the Golden Age. She then becomes a nun. At a final moment, Lancelot attempts to reach out to her once again to rekindle their relationship. They meet at the tomb of Arthur. You can see that presented here. She refuses, and she tells him to leave and never come back. Lancelot takes on the ecclesiastical robes himself and becomes a monk in turn, in penitence and in contrition. You can see then that their Eros, their romantic passion, was not just a harmless thing. And although it enabled Lancelot to achieve great feats, though he defended Guinevere's honor multiple times, that he was able to rescue her from her execution, which in itself is militarily a brilliant achievement, akin to something like Robin Hood rescuing Little John from the hangman's noose in Nottingham. Ultimately, it broke his bonds of loyalty and her marriage. And that was so they broke two fundamental social obligations, one between a husband and a wife, and one between a lord and his vassal. And in turn, this rupture within the social order spread throughout the rest of the kingdom, turning it into turmoil and war, turning the lord and his vassal against each other, and allowing for a tyrant like Mordred to rise in the chaos. Eros disrupts order. I think we see that in somebody like Augustine in his Confessions. He's very concerned about the fact that inwardly, in our souls, in our psychologies, our passion for a woman, let's say, when we are overcome by love and lust, it upsets all of us. Our reasoning cannot withstand it. We cannot restrain ourselves. We're almost compelled to follow. That's on an individual level, that's an inward level, but that's manifested in the social too. It breaks open both spheres and allows chaos to flood in. But it can also go further. It can actually manifest on a cosmic or metaphysical level. It can stand against and defy the gods themselves. And we see this in Wagner's Ring Cycle, particularly in Opera 4, Gotterdammerung, or the Twilight of the Gods. This scene that you're seeing here, this was some lovely pictures by Arthur Rackham, an English painter and illustrator. These are actually from the previous opera, Siegfried, who you can see on the left of this screen. Siegfried is the greatest hero that's ever been born. He is the son of Siegmund and Sieglinde, who themselves were descended from Wotan. And he is fearless. He has no fear. He is thus able to forge or reforge the sword Notang, which promises to the wielder victory in all combat. And so he uses this sword to slay the dragon Fafnir, taking his hoard and his ring, the ring forged by the dwarf Alberich from the Rhine-gold, the gold of the river Rhine, part of the very original creation. Now, this ring is as you might imagine, is quite important because it offers the wearer power over the whole world, that you can create great wealth through it and have mastery over others. And when Alberich lost this ring, he cursed it, that whoever wears it or whoever sees it will be consumed by desire to have it, and it will gnaw at them. They will trade anything and everything to get this ring. In a way, although this ring was forged by renouncing love itself, which is a terrible thing, it develops within the self an absolute love or desire or madness for the ring itself. I wonder where Tolkien may have got some of his ideas, despite his protestations. Nonetheless, this fearless warrior is unaffected by this ring because he has no desire for power. Or what he desires is to feel fear itself. It's the one thing he's never had. And he is told by a bird, actually, the music of the birds, which he comes to understand after drinking the blood of the dragon, that there is a woman shrouded by a circle of flame, and only a fearless warrior can enter that fiery circle, sorry. And when he meets this woman, he will fear fear. He will feel fear. And so he does it. He achieves this, and he comes across Brunhilde, the Valkyrie who has been disowned by Wotan. She is woken up by him, and they fall in love almost automatically. They are ravished by each other's presence. They are just overwhelmed and ecstatic in one another's beauty and heroism. And it's all consuming. You can see she looks very radiant at waking up because she's seen that which awakens in her soul great love. And likewise for him. There they are on the left there. And as a token of his love, Siegfried gives Brunhilde the ring. He doesn't know that it confers all power, and he doesn't know he could have power of the whole world with this ring. He thinks so little of it that he's willing to give it away as an expression of his love to Brunhilde. Well, this becomes quite important because in the Twilight of the Gods, we discover that one of Brunhilde's sisters, another Valkyrie, I think her name's Waltrud, comes to Brunhilde in a desperate kind of she's very desperate and panicked by the situation in Valhalla, which is where Wotan resides. And I have my copy of Wagner's Ring, and I'm going to read to you a little passage from this opera. Of course, it's never going to be the same as hearing it and seeing it on the stage or even on a YouTube video, but the words themselves get across some of the key ideas here. So she appears before Brunhilde Waltrauta. She says the following: "Hear and reflect on what I now tell you. Since he and you were parted, that is Wotan, Wotan has sent us no more into battle. Lost and helpless, we anxiously rode to the field. The Lord of the Slain avoided Valhalla's valiant heroes. Alone on his horse, without rest or repose, he roamed the world as the wanderer. He came home of late. In his hand he was holding his spear's splintered shards. They'd been shattered by a hero. With a silent sign he sent Valhalla's warriors into the forest to fell the world ash tree. He bade them pile up the logs from its trunk in a towering heap round the hall of the blessed immortals. He convened the council of the gods. His high seat he solemnly took, and on either side bade the anxious gods be seated, inviting the heroes to fill the hall in their circles and rows. So he sits, says not a word, silent and grave on his hallowed seat. With the splintered spear held tight in his hand, hold as apples he does not touch. Wonder and fear hold the gods in thrall. Both his ravens he sent on their travels. If ever they come back again with good tidings, then once again For one last time, the god would smile forever. Clasping his knees, we Valkyries lie. He is blind to our pleading glances. We are all consumed by dismay and infinite dread. To his breast I pressed myself, weeping. His glance grew less harsh. He was thinking, Brunhild, of you. Sighing deeply, he closed his eye and, as in a dream, whispered the words. If she gave back the ring to the deep Rhine's daughter, from the weight of the curse both God and world would be freed. I weighed his words from his side. Through silent ranks I stole away. In secret haste I mounted my horse and rode to you like the wind. You, O sister, I now entreat, whatever you can, have courage to do it. End the immortal's torment. So, in this scene, what Wagner's essentially got Waltraud saying is that the situation of the gods is dire. Although before Wotan was calling uh, calling to Valhalla great warriors through the passage of death, they would be appointed to die and they would come to Valhalla so that he could fight against the inevitable end, so that he could fight against Ragnarok, which in Norse mythology is what happens. Instead of that, he has essentially given up. His spear has been shattered. This is inscribed with the treatises upon which his power and authority lie. So, with that being broken in the previous opera by Siegfried, unbeknowingly, he has allowed for the ash tree from which his spear came to be destroyed. He no longer calls for further soldiers. He has been wandering the world, and now he sits in silence. He has this cryptic statement about giving the ring back to the Rhine daughters, freeing both God and world. And Waltrauter misunderstands the meaning of this claim. She thinks that means that they will be freed from this stupor. But actually, and what transpires at the end of the opera, is that it will lead to the dissolution and destruction of the gods and of Valhalla, which are, because they themselves are based upon this theft, essentially. It's a little bit complicated to get into right now, but essentially they exist on an immoral basis because of the ring, and so their destruction, they ought to be destroyed, as it were. And Wotan's come to accept that. So a major departure from the Norse sagas. Well, but Waltraute doesn't know that, and Brunhilde doesn't know that yet. Rather, they believe that that the ring must be destroyed if Valhalla is to be saved. So what does Brunhilde say in response? What tales of fearful dreams are you telling me, sad sister? Poor fool that I am. I have risen above the mists of the gods' hallowed heaven. I do not grasp what I hear. Your meaning seems wild and confused. In your eye, so over-weary, fitful fire gleams. With pallid cheek and wan sister, what would you have me do in your wildness? Waltrauta, upon your hand the ring. That's it. Oh, heed my counsel. For Wotan, cast it away from you. The ring? From me? Give it back to the Rhine daughters. To the Rhine daughters? I? The ring? Siegfried's pledge of love? Are you out of your mind? Hear me, hear of my fears. The world's ill fate surely hangs upon it. Cast it away into the waves. To end Valhalla's distress, cast the accursed ring in the river. Brunhilde responds, Ha! Do you know what it means to me? How can you grasp it you unfeeling child. More than Valhalla's bliss, more than the glory of the immortals, the ring is to me. One glance at its bright shining gold, one flash of its noble fire is worth far more than all the gods' eternal joy. For Siegfried's love shines blissfully forth from it. Siegfried's love, if only my rapture could speak to you. That love the ring embodies for me. Go hence to the gods' hallowed council. Of my ring, tell them only this: I shall never relinquish love. They'll never take love from me. Though Valhalla's glittering pomp should moulder into dust. Is this your loyalty? So, in grief, would you lovelessly send your sister away? Betake yourself hence. Fly off on your horse. You'll never take the ring from me. Alas, alas, woe betide you, sister. Woe betide Valhalla's gods. So, what do we see here? Brunhilde's response is no. I will not return the ring to the Rhine. Even if Valhalla falls, even if the gods are destroyed, even if it means the ending of the world, she will not give the ring back. Why? Why? Well, in her view, it is of far greater worth, inestimable worth, compared to all the bliss of heaven. We often think of heaven in mythology as being this wonderful, beautiful place, a paradise, right? And that for centuries people lived their whole lives hoping to get to heaven because it is a release from the sufferings of this life and the most fulsome, a place filled with joy and love. But for Brunhilde, that's not enough compared to what Siegfried offers. Siegfried's love is worth more than that. Again, we're returning to this idea that we saw earlier in the stream, that for those possessed by Eros, love is its own end, that nothing is of higher value, and that nothing is allowed to get in the way. And in Brunhilde's case, that means that she would give up the whole world to be with Siegfried. That's a powerful idea. She's willing to defy the gods, to even let them die, to see the whole world destroyed, to stand against really, I guess, a prophecy or what she ought to do, so moral responsibility, so that she can repose in the ecstasy that she has with Siegfried. This is powerful, it's destructive. It can also be seen as self-absorbed, right? The lovers care nothing for anything else. They care so little that they're not even tempted by power itself. They only care for one another. So they have no sense of maybe their other obligations. So we've looked at a number of examples of Eros and romantic love, albeit too briefly. And we've seen that it can empower characters to great and heroic deeds. It can also be a terrifying hurricane, destroying marriage bonds, social bonds, kin bonds, moral responsibility, and even stand against the gods. Why does it have such power? What is it that compels people to these things through Eros? Why is the pursuit of love above all else, or the good of the beloved above all else, union with the beloved, able to do this? Well, I think one aspect comes from an idea which is called the eternal feminine. And this is a phrase which comes from Goethe's play Faust. At the very end of the play are the following lines: "Everything transient is but a symbol. The insufficient here finds fulfillment. The indescribable here becomes deed. The eternal feminine draws us on high." Now, there has been a lot of debate about what the meaning of this exactly means, but I think that there's a certain common thread to most of the explanations. The eternal feminine is referring to the invisible world, the transcendent, the sacred, perhaps even the divine or ideal. And this ideal, its character and its attributes are seen most clearly within the feminine. Within mortal woman is a kind of mediator of this, or a conduit for experiencing this broader, deeper, richer concept. You can and so this is why I've put this image up on the screen, which I think was by Edward Austin Abbey. Let me just double check because I see Kate's asking in the chat. Yes, Edward Austin Abbey. Sorry, Edwin Austin Abbey. Sir Galahad and the Holy Grail. I love this image. It's absolutely stunning. Galahad, of course, being the son, the bastard son of Lancelot. But why this image? Well, of course, the Holy Grail is the site of, or the pathway to divinity. Within the medieval Catholic world, there was this idea that the body and blood of Christ is truly present within the Eucharist, within the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. The elements of bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. And actually consuming the body and blood has salvific and healing powers and properties. And so, of course, the Holy Grail being the first cup which Christ blessed with this, right, in the Last Supper, is the highest source, or the greatest gateway into the communion with the divine. So Galahad, the greatest knight ever to live, finds the Holy Grail. But it's interesting that in this image, what do we have? We have several angelic females, and the figure who holds this chalice, I guess it's not clear, but I think it's, a feminine character. And so there's an identification here of the mediation into the divine, the pathway to the divine, and the feminine who presents it. Well, I also just wanted to share this painting. I think somebody earlier mentioned John. Is it John Duncan? Somebody recognized the painting. Yes, John Duncan. This is another of John Duncan's paintings. And again, there's a sense that the beauty of these women, there's an almost ethereal quality to them. There's a richness there, a creativeness as well, the association with flowers and fertility, of course. And this creative beauty is an imperfect manifestation of the divine or the sacred, which brought the whole world into being. And of course, in Greek mythology, Eros is not just a cherub-like character who shoots arrows, but is also seen as the source of creation itself. There was the void, there was chaos. Then there was Eros, which birthed forth human beings. So I think there's a that might be part of it, at least from a male side, because this possessiveness, right? This serving the beloved with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength would be idolatrous, right? Because that's supposed to be given to God. But if love is the gateway, if Eros is a gateway to the divine, then perhaps that's why it captures us so. There's almost this infinite deepening behind the on the surface love itself. It kind of stretches beyond the two figures involved into something even more powerful and wonderful and terrifying. Charles Williams, who was one of the Inklings, has very much suggested that uh, this was an idea for Dante in his portrayal of Beatrice. I must confess, I'm not strong on my knowledge of Dante's Divine Comedy, but there is certainly, I think the first part, when he's descent into hell, he is led by the poet Virgil. But following that, on his pathway through purgatory and into heaven, he is very much being led by Beatrice, the one that he loves intensely and passionately with all. I think that in one of his poems he talks about the first time he saw her, his whole mind and heart was just reeling from his sight of her. He was truly blasted with intense passion for her, and I always feel so torn up by the fact that he never was able to truly have this love with her, that he was always from afar. But nonetheless, it brought about some of the greatest poetry which has ever been written. So perhaps there's some gold there, even if he was frustrated in his life. But and on the right, so on the left we've got a Rossetti painting, and in the background you've got Dante, and then the red figure. I think that was actually Beatrice's lover. Or no, sorry, that's not right, because there is another painting of Beatrice dead where this red angel is kissing Beatrice. So that's why I confused him. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But anyway, on the right we have the Empyrean. So this is a very ancient idea about I guess the source or center of divinity. And you have this chorus, this circling chorus of angels, this magnificent sight of them going round and round and round. And in the heart, this sun. But what's there? That is God. And in front, we've got Beatrice and Dante in the foreground looking upon it. The beauty and Dante's love for Beatrice has led him to the Empyrean, to God himself. And at the very end, Beatrice lets him go on to meet with God, to have communion with God. So Dante had this very strong idea, kind of not a common idea actually, in Christian theology, but Charles Williams took it up, that one path to communion with the divine is romance, is Eros. This is surprising, right? Because often we see hardcore Christians warning against sexual immorality, listing out a series of instructions about how Eros should be conducted, how romance should be conducted. Don't do this, don't do that, keep it within marriage. And it's all rather cold and strict. And I think that's partly where the pushback has come in the dissident right. That, oh well, this is cold and unfeeling, and Eros is actually a part of life. And so, but then it goes the other way and throws off all of those morals and says, well, we'll just go in, like the pickup artist, we'll just go and have as much sex as we can. Not that sex and Eros are identical. But Dante is saying, no, actually, Eros is important. For most people, are not going to be your monks and nuns who can live a quiet life of resignation and use that as a path to God. Most people are going to be in romantic relationships. And actually, when we fully embrace that, when we are truly encaptured by our lover, they are, how does Williams describe it? It's like what you're in love with is not just the person you're seeing and knowing, but their perfection and glory in heaven, which is itself a emanation or beacon of the glory of God. So that's where this infinite, um, the infinite depths of that love come from, because you're pushing beyond what's there in front of you into something eternal and well being itself, which I think is oh, just talking about it is just like, wow, this is some this is some really uh charged and ecstatic stuff. But tied in with that, because that might think, oh well, that's almost spiritualizing relationships. But I think for both, Williams makes this point in relation to Wordsworth, one of Wordsworth's poems, which I'll try and get up. That it's still like the conduit is just as important as the end, right? So although it leads to communion with the sacred romantic love and is kind of illuminated by the transcendent and invisible world, why it's so powerful and works is because it's conveyed in flesh, in space and time. You're not just apprehending beauty in the abstract. You're apprehending beauty in a real human being, in a person, a body and soul. He references a poem by Wordsworth, the Prelude, from the Prelude, Book 6. And I'll read the whole poem, and then we'll focus on the key part of it. That very day, from a bare ridge we also first beheld and veiled the summit of Mont Blanc, and grieved to have a soulless image on the eye that had usurped upon a living thought that never more could be. The wondrous vale of Chamonix stretched far below, and soon with its dumb cataracts and streams of ice, a motionless array of mighty waves, 5 rivers broad and vast, made rich amends and reconciled us to realities. There small birds warble from the leafy trees, the eagle soars high in the element, there doth the reaper bind the yellow sheaf, the maiden spread the haycock in the sun, while winter like a well-tamed lion walks, descending from the mountain to make sport among the cottages by beds of flowers. Imagination, here the power so called through sad incompetence of human speech, that awful power rose from the mind's abyss, like an unfathered vapour that enwraps, at once, some lonely traveller. I was lost, halted without an effort to break through, but to my conscious soul I now can say, I recognize thy glory. In such strength of usurpation, when the light of sense goes out, but with a flash that has revealed the invisible world, doth greatness make abode these harbours. Whether we be young or old, our destiny, our being's heart and home, is with infinitude, and only there. With hope it is, hope that can never die, effort and expectation and desire, and something evermore about to be. Wordsworth was a brilliant, brilliant poet, and the lines that Charles Williams was particularly taken by was so the imagination in such strength of usurpation, when the light of sense goes out, so that is sensory perception, apprehends, perceives something, but with a flash that has revealed the invisible world, doth greatness make abode there harbours. So, what is Williams indicating here? Well, he's saying Wordsworth's lines point to what a kind of experience where you're perceiving something. It could be a beautiful sight like Mont Blanc, the mountain. And by itself, such a sight is unable to move you. But with the imagination, and by imagination, well, we'll get to that in a second. It can you are able to see more than what's there. You don't just see the physical shapes. There's something about it which points to the invisible world, to an ideal form of beauty, to powers that shaped and moved and forged the world itself. The greatness and hugeness of a mountain perhaps indicating that. By imagination here we have a double meaning, because in the Kantian philosophy, which was very influential in the period, Kant's great insight, I think, in terms of epistemology is this, that we don't just see objects. Actually, the very nature of experience presupposes that our faculties bring to bear upon what we perceive certain categories. So, for example, space and time. We see the world through the lens of space and time. It's not just an obvious thing. This is why we are able to apprehend that objects persist over a series of minutes or hours. We don't just reason that. We don't infer it. We just see it. It's presupposed. It's the same with space. We don't think about it. We just apprehend that one object is there and then it is a certain distance from another object. But that's not something that the world itself gives to us. We almost have to impose that upon our sensory perceptions to make sense of it. And that was how many philosophers understood the imaginative faculty. We have to almost elevate what we're perceiving in a creative act, an instantaneous creative act, for it to become a coherent whole that we as a perceiver, a subject who perceives, can make sense of and thus act upon. This is his transcendental philosophy. So the transcendentals being those things beyond experience or presupposed by experience, such as space and time. But there's another sense as well, isn't there? Imagination being that conduit. I think the Romantic poets were particularly fond of this sort of idea as a conduit towards divinity, that it could access or go below or beyond reason into perceiving aspects of the world which move us in such a way that we have an effective knowledge of something, of beauty in particular, that we can apprehend it through imagination. So if that idea kind of holds for Wordsworth in terms of a landscape, well, Williams is saying that could also be true of love itself, of romantic love, that through an individual we have a glimpse of this beauty, this greater glory behind them, irradiating them. And so when we love them, it's in part because they manifest through us, for us, that sacred and divine reality. I'd be interested to know what you guys think of that idea in the chat. Let's see how we're doing. So, coming towards the end then, let's try and wrap some of these ideas together. I think that we see in today's society in one way, there is a harnessing of this idea. When you look at the LGBT movement and its campaigning, often um, it justifies what it's calling for using a simple slogan: "Love is love." What does this really mean? Well, we could say that what's being said here is love is of such high value. Love is something which is so worthwhile that nothing should stand in its way. I mean, we saw that, right, with Siegfried and Brunhilde. She wouldn't even allow the gods to survive if it got in the way of her love. There's another sense as well. Love is love is also like a battle cry. It's more powerful than any other force. And we saw that when, sorry, let me go back and show you the picture again. Here we go. Love tramples on almost everything else, right? In Caravaggio, it disrupts culture, religion, art, music, politics, military affairs. Everything is broken up, trampled down, and subservient to Eros. So, and so this gives a sense of inevitability about their cause. That, well, love is love. Not only does it deserve to be elevated as such, but it will be victorious over the forces of, what would they say, the patriarchy, heteronormativity, homophobia, transphobia, etc., etc. But on the other hand, we live in a rather loveless society. We do not have these great romances anymore. Those stories which used to have them, the classic Disney tales, have been rewritten for a modern age. There is rather a focus on the self and self-expression as being the true place of finding meaning, and perhaps they wouldn't be put in these terms, but the transcendent and sacred. The gender relationships have been broken down. Women have a new independence. They no longer need to be in a marriage to be sustained. They, in part, because of the pill and contraception, they can have sex without conceiving, and thus don't need to be supported economically by a man. There's also more opportunities for women in the workplace. And at the same time, the nature of work has changed, so that whereas before, in the early Industrial Revolution, there was a stronger need for defining roles had a gender difference because of their, how would you put it? Well, certain jobs required certain physical traits. Now, most of us all work in offices or on computers or in the arts, or a role where those differences do not come into play as much. And so there's been a flattening out of gender distinctions. All of this has led to calls for equality, perhaps even for superiority of women over men. And this is and moreover, sexual norms have been laxed, have been broken by the sexual revolution. What does this end up with? More divorce. People are having less sex than ever before, than recent times, especially amongst the youth. There is and I love this Marguerite painting because I think it really captures it, that rather than passionate eros, our era is defined by frustration and broken marriages, broken marriages, in for a variety of reasons. So there's this irony: on the one hand, we've got love is love; on the other, it feels very sterile and stale. Perhaps also because we live in a rather bureaucratic social climate. Greatness is not permitted. It's not as easy to do that. So, but and that The bureaucratic system or the managerial system that we live under wants order. It wants to control people according to rational principles, or rationalized principles, I should say. So something like equality, diversity, and inclusivity on economic grounds, so growth, GDP growth. Eros, as we've been saying, empowers people to heroic deeds, and it's also a destructive force because it's the highest goal, because it's an end in itself, and it sees the good of the beloved and union with the beloved as the highest end, the ultimate aim. It is willing to do away with rules and prescriptions. It's thus a dangerous force for the system. Because if it gets in the way of you being united with your lover, well, you're going to take on that system. You're going to overturn it. You will see it crash and burn if you can be together. So our bureaucratic world is very much against this sort of love. But for that very reason, Eros can be a restorative and revolutionary force today. It could be that thing which motivates somebody to take on this regime, or a part of it at least. It's willing to defy all things for the beloved, and that's why it's particularly jealous. It will take down a kingdom or the world for romance. Hence why it's called madness or a pathology, right? It's not rational to sacrifice the whole of civilization for the one you love, but to the lover it is. So I think it could be a powerful thing in a different way to the heroic will of somebody like Beowulf or to the hatred of Ahab. It might even be more powerful as a force against our current situation. However, there are perhaps two things which hold it back from being a real political strategy, right? One of them is you can't plan it. You cannot just choose to fall in love in that way. Not in this sense, especially if we take the ancient and early modern idea, medieval and early modern idea, that it's almost like an external force which takes over you, like a bolt being shot to your heart. You can't choose it. I think that's the key idea. You don't get to choose when you fall in love. It it forces itself upon you, and you just have to deal with it. So you can't have a strategy which is saying, "Oh well, we will get so many people to be fallen in love with each other in a very powerful way, and they will be able to take on the system." No, it doesn't work like that. But moreover, such love is all-consuming. It's not interested in domination or in ruling or in politics. We saw this with Beren and Luthien. Although they did something amazing by reclaiming the Silmaril from Morgoth, although Luthien did something absolutely magnificent by bringing Beren back from death, from conquering death essentially, she didn't do this out of some political strategy. It wasn't for the greater good, and it certainly wasn't. Although it was a good thing taking on Morgoth, they didn't do it to benefit the rest of Middle Earth. They did it because they wanted to be together. And this is seen by the fact that after Beren is brought back to life, they largely withdraw from the running of Doriath and from the affairs of Middle Earth, except when the Nauglamir, the Silmaril placed within the Nauglamir, is stolen by the dwarves and Thingol is slain. That's the only time they return. Beyond that, they stay out of it. Because for them, seeking victory for the free people of Middle Earth is not, they're not interested in it. Their interest is in each other. So there's a self-absorption within such Eros, which precludes, and for them, I don't think it's a bad thing in them It might be in Siegfried and Brunhilde, who are willing to let the gods burn so that they can be together. Um, very Feuerbachian ideas going on there. It it closes itself off from responsibility and only engages when that love is threatened or disrupted. So Beren only goes and gets the Silmaril because it's the only way he can be with his lover. But if he didn't have to do that to be with his lover, he wouldn't do it. In the same way, you're only going to get revolutionary force from the those possessed by romance if the current system or the regime is blocking their romance. And I think that's actually one of the great strengths of our regime, that although, and by strengths I mean in terms of it keeping power, is that it channels this love is love into support for itself. Those who are promoting the LGBT um, causes are deeply tied in with governments, NGOs, corporations. They're not fighting the system, they're pushing it forward, or are the soldiers of it, of the direction it wants to go. And so there's this idea that if you're on the side of love, you're on the side of the regime, which I don't think's true at all. But it manages to harness it in that way. So that's what I've got about the heroic and dangerous qualities of Eros. Let's have a look at the chat. And if anybody sends in any super chats, I will make sure to read them and engage with them. So let's see what people have been saying. So Julius Flavius coming in here. It springs from the primordial male and female. This is Eros and romance. And I do think, again, it's this, there very much is this connection with masculinity and femininity. I spoke primarily about the eternal feminine, but certainly maybe it would need a feminine perspective on the masculine to really highlight its relationship to the divine, or its mediation of the divine. But I do think it's there. It is there as a principle beyond the individual human. Yes, love is fanaticism. Indeed, it's frenzied and possessive and will abide nothing in its path. Oh, this is on Hillary. Yes, he climbed it due to an unfathomed inward inclination towards the heights. There was something that drew him to that place, and whether he could articulate it or not, he just had to go and explore that space, that liminal space. I think traversing the oceans and space as well, and in the Victorian era, the pursuit of the mapping unknown continents, like David Livingstone definitely had that drive within them. I mean, that's what Spengler describes as Faustian man, doesn't he? Well, as an aside on that point, and I'm aware that time is pressing. So a lot of people will say that the Faustian spirit is largely dead today. That people are settling for comfort and ease, and that has nulled or dulled that inward drive within Western men, in particular, right? And this is captured in Nietzsche's concept of the last men, who, as long as they get pleasure, they're fine. They'll obey. They won't seek greatness. But I actually think that there is a sense in which the Faustian spirit is still alive in two places. One of them is in the health industry, or maybe it's bigger, but the health industry. There's people that talk about trying to eliminate disease and all illnesses, that they want to overcome death itself. And to do this, they will micromanage all of life. They will conquer all spheres to achieve this. Perhaps that's just managerialism in general, right? It wants to overturn and control all of nature, including human beings. On the other hand, you see something like the trans movement, which seeks to conquer the body, essentially. That, some people feel alienated from their bodies, and so they will remold them. They will gain victory over the body and bring it into alignment with their feeling. There's a sense then in which the Faustian spirit's been turned in on humanity itself to control it, to master it, and overcome all of its obstacles. I agree that this. Sorry, I should have put this one first. That there is this drive towards wholeness is also part of the longing that you are completed in the beloved because of your love for the other and their love for you. And if we took like a Jungian or approach, you could say, well, each of us bear within us the masculine and the feminine, of course, to varying degrees. Males tending to have more masculinity, females more femininity. But in a heterosexual relationship, it's almost as if you're getting to explore the other side of yourself within the other, and so that's part of the attraction too. So when I love a woman, I'm almost getting to love the feminine side of myself at the same time, and so I become whole in the process. Yes, it is. John Duncan's an absolutely wonderful painter. I have another of his behind me. It is Saint Bridget or Saint Bride, and I just bought a book about his life and paintings, and I'm hopeful. I know Ferry's pretty keen for this, that we'll do a stream one day on John Duncan, because he's an absolutely amazing artist who's largely forgotten in the Scottish context. So yeah, good taste, Christosis. I apologies for my poor pronunciation. But Kate, yes, not a forgotten artist. Caravaggio, that is an absolutely wonderful painting that he did. I tried to make this a very vivid stream because, if you talk about love, you can't have it all intellectual, right? It's got to have passion. Yes, it is interesting, and that you could see it as dance-like, for sure. I think though that for these artists, there is a connection there because love is awakened by the passions. What does Shakespeare say? If music be the food of love, play on. And many Puritan preachers were concerned that ballads were exciting the passions and leading to sexual misdemeanor. I agree, Vingle. And one of the things I was thinking about was that, I've given several examples of how love is destructive. Tolkien doesn't really have that in his stories. I don't think the story of Turin Turambar really counts as this, because the examples I've been discussing are cases where love itself, Eros itself, rips up the world and the social fabric and the inner self. Tolkien doesn't have that. He just has it in its pristine ideal form, which I think speaks volumes to the man. It's really, really lovely. Yes, and this would reinforce the idea of the eternal feminine being a conduit of the divine, insofar as Luthien, daughter of Melian, who is a Maiar, has that divinity within her, which I think's yeah. So maybe he was tapping into that in an explicit way. Yes, I guess that could be the slogan for the stream, right? If I was trying to be more, if I was trying to get more views, maybe I should put that as the new title. It's quite interesting. I haven't read Candide. Maybe I should. It sounds interesting. Let's see. I'll move down a bit because we're kind of. I know. There's other shows starting soon. So Bjarki, good to see you. Destructive Love, Kriemhild. Is that the name of Destructive Love? If so, that would be a good. That's one of the problems with the English language. We don't have enough words for love. Um, but if that is the right word, then I shall start using it. Hello, Lady of Shalott. Good to see you. That might make sense if the movement presented as scenes of great love. I see sex, desire. That's it. Yes, I agree. It's you don't really get these great Eros stories that we've been talking about here today. But I think by using the phrase "love is love," they're almost harnessing what's in those other myths and legends, and it becomes associated with what they want to support, right? So I think although it's not there itself as a key idea, they almost they associate it with the great idea of love, of Eros, thereby receiving the benefits of doing so. But I think you see the same thing with the rainbow, actually. The rainbow is the symbol of the LGBT community now, although obviously that's been under a number of changes. But what are its original connotations? Well, you've got the covenant with Noah. You have stories of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's a pretty beautiful thing, which has associations with the transcendent and great bounty, with the key to life. If I was trying to choose a symbol for a movement, that's a great idea if I want to make it look positive, wholesome, and natural. So, the people that kind of come up with these phrases and slogans, they know what they're doing. Like I think very sincerely, they believe that they're drawing out some of the more positive and strongest aspects of what they are fighting for. Lady of Shalott. People are so atomized. Even if people cannot articulate what is wrong, or afraid to for fear of being labeled a conspiracy theorist, their inner voice is telling them this is wrong. Yes, and I think that's true on several levels, such as the well, the alienation from the economic system, the social fragmentation, the anxiety and depression many people are feeling, the lack of sex drive, despite being in a sexually explicit and saturated culture. These are all warning signs, and people feel that, as you say, even if they can't articulate it. Kate, whatever the conveniences of politics or politics in society, humans will always need love. It's inescapable, and to try causes the kind of anger and disconnection we see today. Absolutely, absolutely. I do think there's a question though of what kinds of love are needed and to what extent. In myths and legends, we see idealized archetypes, and so we see love in its purest and crystallized form. And perhaps that is not the way for most of us. And indeed, maybe it would be bad if it was so overpowering in the way that we see our characters. There should be some of that. Maybe it should be a key part of our life, but I would wonder, should it come at the expense of our obligations to our kin, for example, or to the moral order, to the divine? So I think that would be something worth teasing out because we have a very it can be rather simplistic in ways it's presented. And then beyond that, the Greeks, had the various terms for love, and the Christian term, the one that dominates Christian theology is agape, this sort of love of brother, love of the other, uh, which came to dominate, in a weird way, came to dominate the thinking of people like Hegel, Fichte, and Feuerbach. So, is that the kind of love that we need? Maybe another stream's needed on that. Oh, we've got a question here. True, might it be because many people don't see it in their parents? Perhaps, perhaps. And maybe there's two sides to that. On the one hand, they're not seeing it because they're on the computers, chatting on Twitter, playing PlayStation or whatever. So they're disconnected from their parents. They spend most of their time at school or with their friends. But then on the other hand, divorce rates are really high nowadays. So perhaps, although there was love there, or a seed of love, it's not blossomed in many relationships, sadly, or it's withered. Maybe that would be a better way to put it. Is withered, and so we're seeing more breakups than before. That's going to have an impact on how children understand romantic relationships, isn't it? It's going to affect whether we feel we can have something like Beren and Luthien or Siegfried and Brunhilde if all around us we're seeing love breaking up. And then that can be outside of marriage as well, right? None of these, I don't think, take like Lancelot and Guinevere, they were not married, or Siegfried and Brunhilde were not officially married, but they had the sort of love which we often identify with it. So that bond which is unbreakable, if we're seeing it broken everywhere around us, it causes us to doubt the reality of this sort of affection. Some of these paintings are just so wonderful, aren't they? So I think that brings us to the end of the stream. If there's any final questions or super chats, just drop them in. In the meantime, I'll kind of advertise a couple of things that are coming up. So on Sunday afternoon GMT, I shall be appearing on Yiz the Eunuch's channel. I'm very excited about this. Yiz is really awesome, pretty cool person, and it's one of those people that's just filled with energy and a verve for life. Who I really like that about Yiz, and we're going to just have a chat about various topics, a lot to do with what I do on this channel, kind of going into why I do it and where I see it going and so on. So look out for that. That should be really good fun. And then next Tuesday, oh, I've got a bumper stream for you guys. So we're back with English Restoration. Going to be joined by Rupert August and Daughter of Albion and Birdie from Woman's Hour. And we will be discussing the history of chocolate, particularly in England, 19th century Victorian industrial England, the history of chocolate. We'll look at the emergence of the chocolate industry, such as with companies like Fry's, Cadbury's, Rowntree's, and then also the social dynamics of this, how these companies were quite unique during the time period and really had a concern for the worker and taking care of the workforce, providing their employees with good living, essentially, and a good quality of life. So that should be really good fun. And of course, you know we'll be talking about our favorite chocolates, how they developed advertising of chocolate, and so on. So it should be a lot of fun. Let me see if I can find. I put a couple of images up on Twitter a while back um, of Victorian chocolate. Here we go. So let's see. Just as a little taster, pun intended. So hopefully you can see. So there we've got some fries. The milking women have come back with tubs of fries chocolate. This is one of my favorite. You've got the Chad fireman, the chief fireman. There's a fire going on, and he's just drinking hot cocoa. Make strong men stronger. And then a couple more. So Cadbury's cocoa again, absolutely pure, not beaten. See, a good pun there. Because then you've got this little boy playing cricket. He's not going to be beaten. He's going to stand against the tide. He will be defiant at the crease. Very English presentation. And then maybe something a little bit more luxurious. The Aero. This is early 20th century. Different for her. Aero, the milk chocolate. That's different. Very classy. Very classy. Could be in a Jane Austen novel, I think. So yeah, that will be great fun. You are right, Kate and Lady of Shalott. They were Quakers, and that was a large part of their why their working conditions were so good for workers. Anyway, we'll get into that next week. All that remains for me to do is to say thank you, all of you who have been tuning in tonight. I really enjoyed this. It's a massive topic. It's almost hard to get a bead on it, and we delved into some of it. I hope it's been informative for you and that you've learned something or taken away something. If you've got any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. So please put them in the comments. Let's discuss them further because there's something really profound and in this, even beyond politics and kind of social affairs. There's something worth thinking about. Till next time, God bless you, whoever you are, wherever you are, and however you are doing. God bless you all. Bye for now.